the government at the end of the day can't rewire your subconscious and give you purpose. That is only something that can come from, I believe, from God. No matter what you believe, looking at the science of it, the science shows that people who believe in God, their cognitive behavior, their brains, look at the MRIs, it's all better.
Hello. Welcome again to another episode in the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on a guest who has written a book. It's called Motorhome Prophecies, a journey of healing and forgiveness, something that you should all go out and read and get a copy of. It's a lot about, challenges faced in life, overcoming those challenges, and finding God and understanding that God has a plan for all of us. And it's none other than Carrie Sheffield. Carrie, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Thanks, Vance. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure. We met a couple weeks ago in DC at an event, and I got a copy of your book, and you signed it for me. Thank you for doing that. And I was like, man, we got to have you on the show because I just felt very inspired by your story. And then I listened to your book. I listened to it on Audible, and so that made me even more inspired. And so I'm glad we're having this discussion today. We'll have a lot of good things to get to. But before we get to all that, let me go ahead and give your bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So Carrie Sheffield is a columnist and broadcaster in Washington, D.C., and author of the bestselling book, like I said, Motorhome Prophecy, a journey of healing and forgiveness. She is also a senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. She's earned a master's in public policy from Harvard University with a business policy concentration, a BA in communications from Brigham Young University, and completed a Fulbright fellowship in Berlin. As founder of Bold TV, a digital TV network, Carrie's entrepreneurial work has been recognized in profiles by the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and many others. She's a member of the Harvard Christian Alumni Society and a winner of the William F. Buckley Awards by America's Future Foundation, listed as a Maverick PAC's Future 40 influential young conservatives, an avid runner who completed the Marine Corps Marathon. Wow. She is a 3-time winner of the National Press Club 5K race among female members of the National Press Club. She loves traveling, and prior to turning age 30, visited every continent, including Antarctica. Man, there's so many different directions that we could go with that, and we will. We will go through a lot of those today, Carrie. But let me go ahead and ask you the first question I do all the guests. Why do you do what you do every day?
That's a great question, Vance. Why do I do what I do every day? I wake up in the morning. I do my best to plug in with God and align as best I can in a flawed way as a flawed human, my purpose with what God wants for my life. And so why do I do what I do every day? Because I know that I am a child of God, and He put me here to do the best I can to serve others, to reflect His will and His compassion to others. And that's a very abstract answer, perhaps, but the big picture also, I desire to advance freedom and flourishing. And so that's why I love your program, Prospering. I like to advance prospering for people.
There you go. Yeah. Let people prosper, that's fantastic. And, I love that not only in your book and in your speeches that you give, and also, just what you said here now is that God has played such an instrumental part of your life. But it's interesting though, because you've had some major challenges, right, throughout your life that, some people could have went in a different direction. Some people could have hated God. Some people could have turned to drugs, or I don't know, a lot of different things that could have went down a different path than the one that you've chosen today. Before we get into some of the details on that, which I really want to hear about and want the audience to know about, what kept your eyes what kept you moving in that direction, in a positive direction versus a negative direction, maybe that some others might have went down?
Well, I think it's important to be honest with ourselves. And so if I'm being fully honest, I was not always in a positive direction.
Yeah.
My life was far from linear in terms of moving forward. There's a lot of ups and downs. And the book talks about some of, as I describe, self-sabotage. And the book is about generational curses that get passed down, unfortunately. And our subconscious wiring, in some ways feels that sabotaging yourself is normal and desirable. And so in order to overcome all that, again, it was not linear, but I do believe even in those moments when I crashed and burned, God was with me and he had pity on me. And I start the book with saying that even though my failures were legendary, God's love was even more legendary.
Amen. Amen. His mercy is always there, and his grace, no matter what we're going through, is always there, which is unfathomable sometimes. I mean, I've definitely not been perfect. And I've had a lot of challenges as well. But God is a huge part of my life, of my family's life, of just so many things that go through it. And the struggle is real. And so a lot of times I'll have on a lot of top economists and politicians and everything else. But I think the point of kind of my reason for calling this a Let People Prosper show is ultimately because I believe my calling is to let people prosper. And it was a lot of the dark times where I felt like God was speaking to me, and teaching me about these things, the direction it was going to go. I never knew that it would be a podcast and talking with you and doing all of these things, but it's remarkable, the life that we get to live here on earth. And, in some cases, I try to make heaven on earth as much as possible, even though it is fallible and we have a lot of other things that are wrong here. God created this for us. And so I think that it was just so remarkable, a lot of the things that you went through. And so maybe let's go ahead and start there. Where do you like to start? Because I mean, look, you've got so many great things in this book. A lot of it that I didn't know about the Mormon church, LDS and everything else. And just starting with all that. But where do you like to start with your story, Carrie? Because we got a lot, we have quite a bit of time today. So I want to get through a lot of it. And where do you like to start? Let's just go there.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been doing a lot of speaking engagements and talking about the book. But as you mentioned, and you held up your copy, here's my copy.
Yeah.
It's called Motorhome Prophecies, A Journey of Healing and Forgiveness. It's called Motorhome Prophecies because my father claimed to be an LDS. The shorthand, the church doesn't like to be called Mormon anymore. They're going to go away from that. They prefer LDS, so Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the official name. And I note that in the book, but it's still very well known, or even just the Mormon diaspora, because there are a lot of splinter groups that are still under kind of that bigger umbrella that's called Mormon. But in any case, it's a shorthand way that people know that kind of strain of where Protestant, theology is coming from. And so in any case, my dad was excommunicated from that official LDS church for being an extremist, self-proclaimed prophet. And he made my 7 siblings and I live in a motorhome with our mother. So 7 biological siblings and our mom, with dad, 10 people in the motorhome.
Wow.
I describe our childhood as careening in and out between a third world existence and a first world existence. So sometimes we had houses, but sometimes we were homeless. When one of my brothers was born, he was born when the family was homeless and living in a tent. So my brother was born in a tent in Greenbelt Park, Maryland, in a campground. When I took my ACT exam, we were living in a shed in the Ozarks with no running water and no heat. And in the end, I went to 17 public schools and homeschool. And so the only constant was chaos.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it also involved abuse. And I say in the book, there's no shame in being poor, living in trailer parks like I did. No shame at all in that. The shame is where abuse is involved. And abuse and mental illness, we see that cutting across zip codes. And in my dad's case, as I mentioned earlier, there was intergenerational trauma that he passed to us because he had been raped by a babysitter in his local church community. As I understand, that's where they found her. And he said that assault made him suicidal as an adult. And so he passed down that ideation to my siblings and I, to the point where 4 of my siblings have now attempted suicide, and I was suicidal. And it's just a lot to carry, And so the book's about coming through that. And Eventually, two of my brothers developed schizophrenia. When I was 17, the older one groped me and tried to rape me. And the other one said I tried to seduce him, have sex with him. And when I turned 18, I told my dad, I want to leave because this is the opposite of what you said. You like to create heaven on earth.
Yeah.
I was living hell on earth.
Hell, yeah.
But hell on earth is a motorhome with 10 people, including a 200-pound plus man who wants to rape you when you're a 100-pound girl. And so I told my dad I wanted to leave. And this was after a long process that I call my first investigative journalism project. Is my father a prophet? Because after my brother attacked me, I felt really unsafe and went through a big discernment period of, do I believe that my father's a prophet? Because as you know from the book, the way he expressed that prophetic call was to have us play music on street corners together and pass out brochures to try to convert people to become Mormon. And so I had bought into that for a long time because it's my dad and we all kind of idolize our dads. And I had to go through this discernment period because I didn't feel safe about whether I was fully invested in this, and came to the discernment that no, I did not believe he was a prophet anymore, or that if he was a false prophet. In any case, I told him I wanted to leave. And he raised his right hand and he says, I prophesy in the name of Jesus, you'll be raped and murdered. And which is very a cult-like thing to say. And so I say this sometimes with gallows humor. I'm like, well, my brother's already tried to rape me. He's saying I'm getting raped, whatever I do, So I bit the bullet. Either way, it's a Sophie's choice. It's not a choice that's going to be good. And so, but I did choose freedom. And so I left, and my dad said my blood changed, that I was no longer his daughter. I was disowned. I was the first to leave, even though I have 4 older brothers. So I'm 5th in the birth order, but the first girl and the first to leave. And so part of why he was so alienating of me was because I was the first to leave. And he said I was satanic. And if I came back, that I would corrupt my siblings if I didn't come back permanently. And so I was not allowed home all through summer breaks or Christmas breaks or anything like that during college. And I mean, a lot happened, but eventually I grew to hate the idea of God. I figured since God seemed to hate me, I returned the favor. And so I was agnostic for about 12 years. And the book goes through how I, in my opinion, very unexpectedly, became a Christian. And even after that, I still wrestled with a lot of personal idolatry issues and unforgiveness, and still working through the trauma and subconscious rewiring. But overall, I'm on a much better path.
It's remarkable. And I know, like, for the audience, I mean, of course, she's doing a brief summary of it because there's a lot of things to dig into. And, I remember when reading the book and you talking about it now about, what it must have been like to have 10 people in a motorhome and because this isn't like a large motorhome, right? Like it's just maybe it has how many beds did it have?
Well, my dad jerry-rigged, he made double bunk beds in the back room. Okay. And so the brothers were stacked. It was almost like it being in the Marines or something, like barracks.
Wow.
So the 4 boys and then my younger brother on this little cushion against the back window. So that's where the 5 boys were in the back room. And then my parents slept on the fold-out couch that became a bed in the living room area. And then the 3 girls, we would sleep in the overhang, which over the cab. And that's how we did it.
Wow. Man. And so when you were going through all of this and your dad is telling you he's a prophet, I mean, I guess for a while, like you believed him though. I mean, it's your dad, you love him. He's there with you. Like you had you're young. And so you don't have any other thing to think about. Whenever you started going through this time about questioning where he was coming from, like the things that he was doing and questioning God and everything else, I wonder, like, how did that make, like, how did you deal with that? Because that had to be a huge struggle, like something that you had you thought you knew about your dad was not the case anymore. That just had to be a huge struggle. I wonder how you dealt with that.
Yeah. So like I said, I went on this investigative project after my brother attacked me. Because I just was like, wow, I got to figure out what I'm doing with my life. And by that point I was in high school and they have this in an area in the Ozarks where I had gone to high school for a semester. They had a column called the Young Voices segment where they allowed people in high school and college to write op-eds. And so I was writing op-eds. I wrote my first op-ed when I was 17. And so I took an interest in journalism and media. And so I told my dad, because he was interested in writing his memoir, I said, I'm interested in writing. I can type up, because we have this very, very old school word processor. And I said, I can type up your documents that you have, because he had a lot of primary documents, like letters from his mom, letters to his mom, like in several boxes that he was keeping in the back of a fiberglass trailer attached to the motorhome. And so I sorted through these boxes as part of understanding my dad and was typing them up. And as I was doing that, I came across letters, like I said, between his mom and himself. And this was back in the day when they had carbon copies, which was like, you're younger, you would not know what that is. And I only know because my dad was born in 1938, but it says CC on an email. It's actually like, it's a throwback to actual carbon paper. They used to put paper and then black carbon, and they would, basically when you wrote on it and you put pressure or typed on it, it would create a printed, replica of it. And so we had the replicas back and forth between his mom and him. So I had both letters, and I found them to be disturbing because I found him to be very judgmental and angry toward his mother. And disrespectful was my view of it. But the thing that really threw me for a loop was I found these handwritten, just in his own handwriting, prophecies that he'd written down. And he had written them in the same form of old school Elizabethan English that people do, or that the Doctrine and Covenants. So within Mormonism, there are 4 books of scripture within the official LDS Church. There's the King James Bible, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, and Pearl of Great Price. And of those 4, only one is purported to be of modern origin, and that is the Doctrine and Covenants. And that is handwritten revelations that Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, wrote down. He said he was getting them from God on how to direct the church. And he wrote them in old school Elizabethan English, or at least that's the way it's printed and has been printed. I don't know because I know they did some grammatical changes and things, but in any case, they're published as old school King James English. And this was how my father had handwritten his prophecies. And they were handwritten, in the same style of, thou shalt do this with thy wife. And they were written to him in his God name. He told us he had a God name, Daniel Strong, which is different from his given name, which is Ralph Sheffield. And when I found these handwritten prophecies, I just started to shake, and I just felt so just traumatized and conflicted because I was at that point very devout LDS still. And within that theology, when you're talking about the mainstream, the big church, the Mitt Romney church, which is, very large now, 17 million members or so. There's only one leader, and he lives in Salt Lake City, and his name was never Ralph Sheffield. And so, more to the Catholic Pope idea. And so my father was basically committing heresy by using the style of Joseph Smith to claim a prophetic mantle. And so I said, I'm at a crossroads here. And I knelt down in that fiberglass trailer, and there was, a heater going on. It was winter. And I prayed and I said, God, I am going to leave. Unless you show me why I should stay, I am deciding to leave.
Wow.
and I felt peace. But
Wow.
it was a long discernment process, but
Yeah.
I felt that I had a good reason for leaving, and
Mm-hmm.
it gave me confidence to know that I was going to start a new path that was, I didn't know what it was going to entail. And it, like I said, it entailed a lot of self-sabotage.
Yeah.
And so there are lots of things I would have done differently.
Sure.
But at the same time, I am glad that I chose that freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I could tell that it still bothers you sometimes. Like whenever you were talking about that, whenever you like, I could tell like even whenever you were saying how you saw the letter and everything, that it still gets to you, right? Because that's part of who you are. Like those are the lessons that you've learned over your life. And the other thing that I like to talk a lot about is institutions, like the importance of institutions. And I think of institutions as not just being like government institutions and businesses and buildings and all that stuff. Like those are important, but also like in our own life, I think we have institutional changes that happen in our life that are kind of tipping points. To think about Malcolm Gladwell for a minute, where you have these tipping points that happen in your life to where you can see when things really change. And I know for me, I grew up very low income family in South Houston, Texas. My dad had epilepsy, so I saw him have thousands of seizures over my life. My mom dropped out of high school when she was in 10th grade, went to go live on her own at 16 and stuff like that. And they were very loving, but they got divorced when I was 5. That was a big like institutional change for me whenever they were divorced. And then I'm living with a single mom. I lived with my grandparents for a little while. And there was a lot of strife that went on like within my own family. My mom dated a female for a while who would be abusive and abuse my sister and I. And I went and lived with my grandparents for a couple of years while all that stuff was going on. So that were kind of like institutional changes. And then I started playing drums. I was a hard rock drummer for a few years, and that was another institutional change where, I got into it. I mean, I was into the drug, sex, and rock and roll. Like I was really all into that and not going in a good direction. And then May 25th, 2002 is whenever I got in a serious car accident. I was a passenger. The driver was my best friend at the time. We were going 120 miles an hour. We were 20. We were young and stupid. And we were going 120. We wrecked in the back end of of a Suburban, came off the exit ramp and rolled at least 6 times. I got life flight to Herman Hospital. But again, that was another institutional change that it was tough. It was terrible. But during that month, like I was all bruised up and everything. And I was just praying to God. I was like, kind of like to your point, like what's going on? I was like, God, where's my life heading? Because I just don't feel like this is going to be good. And, really, I just forgot almost everything that happened before that. Like I couldn't even part my hair like I used to spike my hair. I couldn't even figure out how to spike it anymore. Like it was a total revolution. And then I went on to get a PhD in economics, a first generation college student, and work in the White House and all this fun stuff. And I just say that because these stories are just so important. And I don't know, like your story really affects me, like when I read it and everything else and listen to you say it. And I wonder though, what are some of the other big institutional changes that you've had in your life to where you think, these were the other parts that kind of set me to where I'm at today?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think at the event where we met, they talk about social capital.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, I mean, you've really overcome a lot of adversity and disruptions to your social capital. And the fact that your life turned around when you came out of the hospital, you were creating new sources of social capital, and you were a different person. And so it's amazing that as you were praying, that God helped change the way that you were processing things, and the way that you sought social capital. Because when you're talking about, in society with poverty and broken homes and fatherlessness, like a lot of young men, for example, they'll turn to gangs because it offers a mentoring relationship, like a big brother or father figure types. And for you, the rock and roll, and it was, you create social capital. It's just a question of, is it life creating or life destroying? And I think for me, it was really hard to create social capital growing up because we were always moving. And so to go to 17 public schools and homeschool all through K through 12, I was always the new girl. And so it was really hard to get an adult to take a vested interest and stand up for us. So that, I saw so many different types of institutions because we were always airdropping in and out. And so, I have a chapter in the book about going to some inner city schools that were majority Black, where, I think one of them was over 90% African-American. And I was bullied for being white, and my Black friends were bullied for being friends with the white girl. And the collapse of social capital in many of the homes of my classmates, mine had its own dysfunction. It was like a different kind. But I saw the setting of drugs and gangs and violence in school. And it's very disconcerting to see the perpetuation of that. And that's one reason why the only position I take in the book is that I support politically. It's not a political book, is that I do support school choice, because I don't think any student should be trapped in a place like that. But in my education, we experienced rural schools, urban and suburban. So I saw kind of the whole, I didn't go to any private schools in K through 12, but in any case, I've seen a lot of different environments. And I think that's part of what made me become a journalist, that I am curious about the world. And I think the problem, it's interesting because I rarely meet anybody who's gone to as many schools. I think I've met a couple people who went to more. It's almost
a lot of schools.
Yeah. And almost always they are military.
Yep.
And so it's interesting to compare and contrast, because again, it's not about moving, or it's not about being poor. It's about the epigenetic environment in which this is happening. And so that's where I think the institution of the family is the fundamental building block.
Amen.
As you know, when there's not a strong social capital within that basic fundamental unit, then everything collapses. And what's so interesting, I find, and again, I don't get into this in the book, but since it's talking, but within the Marxist ideology, there is a desire to destroy the family. So as goes the family, so goes society. And so whether that's just by absenteeism, not even having children, just like not even trying, that's kind of where we're going in some respects with rich post-industrialized countries. If you are having kids, then it's all about just giving them over to the state. So I think it's interesting because in my case, I used to wish sometimes that child custody that I was a foster child. I was never a foster child. And I used to wish sometimes that I was, because yes, the foster care system is broken and needs a lot of work, but there would have been at least some chance versus it was almost like Russian roulette. It's like, okay, if I know that this is going to be the outcome of my life, 100% terrible as far as the outcome of like what's happened with my siblings and I versus like definitely terrible chance versus you may or may not get a good foster home. And most likely they would have probably put me with like a cousin or aunt and uncle, and they're good people. So, so I had I used to think, and it's all hypothetical, but anyway, so I don't know if that answers the question, but I've seen a lot of institutions, and I think it all comes down to the family, and the institution that I've been talking the most about, and that I think needs the most reform is our mental health care system, as it relates to dealing with vulnerable people, and also dealing with children, because we've never had the most suicide as we have today. We have the highest suicide rate and the highest number of suicide deaths in our nation's history, and also the highest depression rates. And yet we've never had more therapists. So something's wrong. And so I in my speaking of, and in the book, I get into some of the data about how the fact that something around 2/3 of therapists are atheist or agnostic.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
And yet,
that was mind blowing.
yeah,
I didn't know that.
And yet 81% of people, Americans, say they do believe in God, according to Gallup.
Yeah.
And so there's this big disconnect. And it's not to say that you can't be a good therapist and not be a person of faith. It's just that, unfortunately, therapists are not trained in how to integrate faith and mental health. And the overwhelming amount of evidence shows there's a strong tie between, I call it healthy faith, which is, positive meditation, religious community, religious practice, strong ties between that and low suicide, low depression, low substance abuse. And so faith can literally save your life. And yet, according to research from a guy named David Rose-Marin, who's at Harvard Medical School, he is practicing Jewish. He's a pioneer in the integration of faith and mental health. He's found that 73% of mental health care patients say, I want faith integrated into my mental health. And yet 71% of therapists say, I have little to no training in how to do that. And a lot of them report that they're uncomfortable doing it. So if we're talking about institutions, our mental health delivery system is an institution that is ripe for healing and just like integrating what actually works. And I mentioned this in the conference where we met because the government at the end of the day can't rewire your subconscious and give you purpose. That is only something that can come from, I believe, from God. But no matter what you believe, looking at the science of it, the science shows that people who believe in God, their cognitive behavior, their brains, look at the MRIs, it's all better. Yeah.
No, yeah, exactly right. And I remember in the book and also in your speech, talking about that. And that's really mind blowing though, to think about how many of the therapists just don't really have the faith because I agree with you that there are a lot of things, there are a lot of troubles that happen. I mean, there are other books that are similar to yours, still different though, but like Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance and Educated by, what was her name? I forgot her name. Anyway, Educated, which is another good book that's out there that people should check out. How was that?
Tara Westover is her name.
Yes, Tara Westover, exactly. But there's another good book that I read recently called Troubled. Have you ever read that book?
Well, the Wall Street Journal actually did a joint book review of mine and Troubled right together. So our book came out right around the same time. I think his was a few weeks before mine.
Yeah. But I also found like that book was really eye-opening for me too, about the troubles within the family and the talk about, to your point, about having a lot of instability within a family can really set you up for either success or failure in many ways down the road. And, it's a struggle that I have though sometimes, Carrie, where I think some people want to blame only their past for where they're at now. And so sometimes I'm like, just wake up. You're in today. Let's go forward. I think it's my more optimistic, let people prosper sort of mentality. And I mean, I'm a Christian. And so to me, we're limited to what we have here. In our next life, when we go to heaven, it's going to be much better, but we've got to live this life the way we want to live it now, or God wouldn't have given it to us. But I guess if you're in despair and you have these challenges that happen when you're a family, whether it's epigenetic or otherwise, from nature versus nurture sort of issues that are going on, it really is a challenge. And I don't know that with the therapy, and I think life coaching is really important and all this stuff too. And there's a lot of good resources that are out there for people, but I think there's also a lot of people that just don't know about the resources. I've read a lot about Albert Ellis and emotional behavioral therapy, EBT, and it's kind of, that area is kind of one of my hobbies that I like to read and work on a lot. And I think there's a lot of good insights that can come from all that stuff. But at the same time, they misses so much because of that lack of the faith of how much that Jesus and believing in Jesus, you're able to have a better life, that you can be saved through grace. And if you don't have those sort of positive things to look at, it does make you, I think, us focus more on our childhood, more on our past, and things of that nature. What do you think about that? Am I way off target?
No, it reminds me exactly of something that so last June, I organized an event at the Museum of the Bible called The Bible and Mental Health.
Okay.
And it was all about the connection between faith and mental health and how the science, trust the science, again, shows there's a strong tie between faith and strong mental health. I would say there are a few studies that show a negative correlation between, and that would be, I think, a situation like mine, growing up, where it was extreme religious abuse. So where it is a healthy faith that is practiced in a healthy way, then it is life-giving. But one of the themes that came up from the conference was what I describe as rumination or redemption. And from our mental health care delivery. So one of the speakers I had at the conference, she's one of the policy directors for the American Association of Christian Counselors, which is tens of thousands of Christian therapists. And she says quite often she'll have patients, especially she notices with younger people, they'll come in because they saw something on TikTok with a whole shopping list of all of the disorders they believe they have. And it's almost like a trendy thing, like the latest designer jeans kind of thing. Like, I have this disorder. And it's like, but it's sad because it's like, she said, it's like they believe that is their identity, and they believe that's who they are, so to say with my brothers, like, they are schizophrenic versus they are suffering from schizophrenia. It's a nuance, but to say that, I have been, I have been diagnosed with PTSD, depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and fibromyalgia. And when I walk around thinking about those and stay in a place of redemption or rumination, the rumination is like the hamster wheel going round and round. That is where we get stuck. And even we go downward. And what faith offers in positive thinking and counseling therapies that are, going toward a positive end, that is redemptive. And so it's all about what do we want as a society, redemptive versus ruminative, therapy. And I think right now, so many of the modalities, they drag people down because you're actually just repeating trauma. And so you're actually reliving it, and you're actually creating new triggers by repeating it, as opposed to finding a way to move past it and find redemption in it. And so that's part of why I've suffered a lot, even after coming out of things and getting into faith. Like, I still was trapped in what I call trauma brain for a long time. And it really wasn't even until last year that I went through this program, of which I've told people it was the second most impactful thing for me after becoming a Christian, was this program in Austin, Texas. Actually, they have it in Austin and in Las Vegas right now. They used to have it other places, but they had to shut it down during COVID. But in any case, it's called the Atlas Project. And some people say it's similar to Hoffman or Landmark. But what Atlas did for me was it exposed my subconscious to myself, and how much they say like an iceberg has just, massive, the far biggest portion of an iceberg is below the water. And then there's just a smaller above. That is our subconscious, is the stuff below the water. And what we present to the world is the conscious. And I went to Atlas because I just had this long history of dating men. Like, I'm 42 and I'm not married and I want to have kids. But kept over and over. It was like Groundhog Day, like dating the same man with a different name of, a man, I spent my 40th birthday with a man who was cheating on me with multiple women, I found out later, and gaslighting me and lying to me and manipulating me. And, another one had been cheating as well. And others were emotionally abusive or just very negative influences on me. And yet I would just beg for more, And I'm just like, why do I do this? And in the Bible, it says, I do things that I don't want to do. Why do I do them? it's like my sister married an alcoholic who beat her. It's
Yeah.
like she and I would want to go on a dating app and be like, I'm going to swipe right on a cheater. I'm looking for a cheater. Like I'm looking for a drug addict, like, it's like,
Yeah.
this isn't what I want, but yeah, I keep going back to it. Because it's what feels normal.
Yeah.
And so what I learned from the subconscious was I had not healed from deep negative cognitive patterns. And so I was attracting men who had not healed from their deep cognitive patterns. And I was begging for them to love me because I did not learn to fully love myself. And so what was showing above the surface was high achieving in my career, going to Harvard, working at Goldman Sachs, working on national different events, was a White House correspondent. But below the surface is all of these self-undermining, sabotaging trauma brain things that I fully resolved. And so I think on a bigger level, I think in many cases we see technology, and there's a really good book that maybe you saw as well, The Anxious Generation, came out last year also, which looks at technology and how it's strongly tied with suicide and depression and just mental illness with young people. Mm-hmm. And for the first time in society, he identified what he calls the inverted U curve of happiness. So it used to be that young people life would be the happiest at the beginning and at the end. So super happy in your 20s and, teens or whatnot. And then there's a dip in middle age, and then you get happier when you're old. Well, for the first time, it collapsed among the young people. And young people were more miserable and suicidal than middle-aged people in some cases. And that's a 5-alarm fire. And I believe the technology in some ways has subconsciously rewired a lot of, especially young people, with these negative impulses, with the self-sabotage, with the comparison, all the 7 deadly sins. And it's become almost like a mind hive. So I feel like what happened with my childhood was like a precursor of like a toxic mind hive. Like I like to say, I grew up in a rolling insane asylum, and America has become a rolling insane asylum in some respects.
Wow. No, it's all good stuff here. It reminded me of your points about not being defined by what they're telling you. Because a couple of years ago, I went through this whole thing because anyway, we did some testing for ADHD and stuff. And the testing actually showed that I had OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, and major depressive disorder. And I don't really ever feel like I'm depressed, but for me, I didn't take it as it defined me. Like, I'm not a depressed person. I'm not obsessive compulsive in that sense, but it helped me to learn like more about myself. And so then I took it on. I'm a learner in general. And so I started reading books about it and like getting involved with it more. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Because once you have like so many traumas happen to you over your lifetime, how can you not have some sort of depression or some sort of other quote unquote disorder that's going on? But I won't, but just like you, I'm not going to let that define me, because I know I have a greater purpose. I know I have something else that's going on. And so I'm so glad that you told your story and that you wrote your story, the Motorhome Prophecies. I hope to write mine one day as well. And so this gives me a lot of inspiration on the things that you're working on and all the great stuff you're doing now, Carrie, and really helping people prosper and everything else. And so I appreciate you being on the program, and God bless you and your family. And I hope that you have much success that continues.
Thank you, Vance. Thank you. And all the best with you and telling your story and in your show. Thank you for caring. And as the Bible has that verse about prospering, that I, the Lord, have plans for you to prosper you, to give you hope in a future. And so I love what you're doing with the program. So I wish you all the best.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, for the audience, I hope you'll go out and get a copy of Motorhome Prophecy, a journal of healing and forgiveness by Carrie Sheffield. You'll love it. It's a great book overall. I can see this being a movie one day. I don't know if you started that yet, Carrie. Have you started the movie yet?
I'm still getting through the book, but
all right. But
so we'll see.
Okay. All right, cool. I think it'd be a great movie. But for the audience, go check this stuff out. I think you'll really like it a lot. I'll put it in the show notes page as well. Remember, you can find information about me at vanceginn.com and get all of the show notes at vanceginn.substack.com. And so I'll put all this information and a link to the book and so much more. But until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.